On the afternoon of December 5, 1945, the sea lay flat as a sheet of polished steel, smooth enough to mirror the sky. The 5 TBM Avengers of Flight 19 skimmed through the air as if gliding on silk, their V-formation steady, the roar of their Wright R2600 engines blending into a resonant, unshakable chorus. In the cockpit of the lead aircraft, Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor glanced through the windscreen, confirming the horizon remained taut as a drawn line. He lowered his gaze, scanning the instruments. Oil pressure steady, cylinder head temperature normal, airspeed good, then paused at the chrome-plated compass mounted at the center. Its black needle, sharp as a diamond shard, had always been the most reliable companion across the shifting seas. And then, in a moment that seemed trivial, the needle quivered. So slight it could have been dismissed as vibration from the propellers. Taylor paid it no mind at first. He adjusted his control stick by a degree, checked again. The compass needle would not hold. It flickered, like a small fish straining against an unseen hook. This time he frowned. Taylor tapped the glass with his finger, a ritual as old as flight itself. The needle froze. 2 seconds. 3. Then swung on a slow arc, scraping past north, sliding into east, as if the map of the world itself had just turned upside down. "Flight leader to all, check your compasses." His voice was dry, low, but calm. Replies trickled back through the static, like drops on water. 2 here, mine's shaking. 3, was steady. Wait, it just drifted. 4, off by 2, 3 marks, no sign of settling. 5, same as 4. Taylor looked up. The formation was still tight, wings slicing silver lines through the gray sky. Only the needles, those tiny, enchanted beasts, were abandoning their posts. One aircraft with a faulty compass was routine. 5 at once. That was the sort of anomaly that raised the hairs on, hoping brightness might reveal truth. But truth did not belong to light. Truth was in the subtle shift, as salty as the wind. Direction itself was beginning to speak another tongue. "Maintain formation. Do not rely on a single compass," Taylor ordered. He opened a small case on the panel, pulling out a pocket compass, a pilot's old superstition, and set it beside the main. 2 needles, both drunk, refused to agree. One leaned northeast, the other licked southwest. Yet the horizon ahead remained fixed. The sea below was flat. So what then was churning? In the radio cabin of Plane 4, Matthews tuned the antenna, ear pressed to the static of the ether. The hiss was faint, like dust whispering. He scribbled, "Signal's clear." He reached out, touched the metal frame of the auxiliary compass. Cold as stone, no hint of an electrical leak. He glanced up at his pilot, still holding steady on Taylor's trail. That calmness was comforting and terrifying. For when the compass ceased to be a friend, calm was nothing more than a thin layer of ice. Minutes passed. The sky did nothing but remain still, and in that stillness, the needles performed their dance. One swayed eastward 5 degrees, then slid back 2. Another leaned past north, froze for a heartbeat, then twitched away. No longer a matter of vibration, this was a force dragging north elsewhere, or dragging minds into a maze without exit. "Leader, this is 3. Request confirmation by the sun." Lewis clung to ancient wisdom, but the afternoon sun had slipped behind gray bands, leaving only a knife-thin rim of light, useless as an anchor. "Not available," Taylor replied curtly. He tilted his head, straining to read that faint glow, the last bass note of nature's symphony. But it, too, was no more trustworthy than the compass needle. For a fleeting instant, Taylor felt his own body lose its orientation. In the Pacific storms of war, his bones had always told him which way to turn. His spine was a damp compass, attuned to like a drunk stumbling across painted lines. The radio man scowled, pulling out a dusty manual on navigation without instruments, a chapter once dismissed as for awareness only. Tonight, it became scripture. Above, the formation cut clean across the sky, a spearhead thrust into distance. Anyone watching from cloud shadow would see perfection. But within those trembling fuselages, a silent coup had begun. The compass needle, aviation's guardian, was lying. A thick, heavy silence pressed over the radios. When Taylor spoke again, his calm was almost eerie. "Report fuel levels and confirm formation. We fly by me." He no longer said the word compass, as though naming the demon might summon it. Yet all knew the demon already sat on their panels, smiling at each trembling needle. Below, the sea darkened, gold retreating into memory, leaving only a deep green-blue sheen. In that vastness, there was no north, no east, no west, only numbers draining from fuel gauges and a horizon that withheld its secrets. At the center of it all, 5 young men, 1 seasoned leader, and a handful of treacherous needles pressed on into the moment when the world ceased to be round. And that was when the tale of anomaly truly took shape. Not storm, not lightning, not explosion. Only the silent shift of a needle, enough to tear apart the map of an entire squadron. Inside the cockpits, the air had changed. From routine calm, every pilot now realized they had been thrust into the harshest test, one no manual had ever prepared them for. Everything they had been taught about navigation, trust the compass, follow the radio, compare the map, had turned into shredded paper. The needles spun, the radios flickered, the sun slipped away behind walls of gray. Lieutenant Taylor, the commander, grasped a single truth. When tools betray, men must become each other's tools. He drew a deep breath, steadied his voice. "Flight leader to all, forget your compasses. Keep your eyes on formation." It jerked back and forth like a drunk on a tightrope. He swallowed. He remembered reading about magnetic anomalies, places where Earth's field wavered. But no textbook had ever said 5 planes at once would fall victim. He remembered Taylor's order, "Forget the compass," and he chose to obey. Taylor, still the anchor, flew by instinct, ignoring his instruments. He watched the horizon and the sea. Ripples in the swells were his last cues. He tilted his head, reading them. Was the wind shifting, or was it illusion? In his chest, a hard question beat. If both compass and wind betray me, what remains? Radio silence stretched taut as wire. Then 4's voice broke in. "Leader, this is 4. I see a shadow, like an island." Taylor's heart jolted. He looked down. The sea was vast, featureless, only streaked with silver foam. No island. He knew the trick, mirages born of clouds and reflection. But if a young pilot veered toward it, the formation would collapse. -4, no island. Hold your line. Do not break formation." Taylor's steel tone crushed the doubt. In times like this, faith in a leader mattered more than any compass. Still, another weight pressed on him. Fuel! Each Avenger carried 5-hour supply, but since the compasses failed, at least half an hour had been wasted wrestling with bearings. If they didn't regain a course soon, time itself would be the enemy. Taylor chose not to reveal this. The truth might shatter what fragile calm remained. In Plane 5, Matthews, the seasoned radio man, scribbled notes. Compasses all failing, not isolated error, possible magnetic interference, possible system-wide fault. Then he scratched it out, writing instead, "Cannot explain." The phrase engineers dreaded most, yet it was the only honest one. As darkness thickened, the horizon vanished into ash-gray sky. With day's last light fading westward, the need for mutual dependence grew sharp. The sea below no longer mirrored silver, but opened into a pit of black, indistinguishable from the sky. To the young pilots, it felt like they flew through a void, as though the world itself had been erased. In Taylor's cockpit, the instruments glowed dimly under panel lights. He steadied his voice. "Hold formation. Whatever happens, do not scatter." But the radios were failing too. Words arrived broken, drowned in static, like echoes from some distant world. Plane 2 had to relay, "Leader says hold formation! Do not break!" Silence followed, heavy and suffocating, pierced only by the engine's steady roar. Beneath the metal skin, hearts pounded, sweat trickled under flight helmets. They all knew the truth. The compasses were useless, the radios failing, maps meaningless without position. All that remained was fragile faith. In Plane 3, Lewis lifted his eyes, praying for a star. None appeared. The clouds had devoured the heavens. He recalled his instructor's advice: when compasses fail, find the North Star. But tonight, the sky itself was treacherous. He sighed, turned back to the wing ahead. That was the only North Star left. Elsewhere, whispers of dissent stirred. In Plane 4, a gunner cried out, "Maybe we should turn west. There must be land somewhere." But the pilot barked back, "No, if we split, we're lost for real. Taylor said hold, so we hold." That short quarrel revealed the pressure mounting. No one dared say it aloud, but all thought it. What if Taylor is wrong? Total dependence on one man meant if he erred, they would all fall together. Taylor, in the lead, wrestled with his own doubts. 14 lives hung on his judgment. He calculated, by schedule, they should be turning home by now. But with spinning compasses, were they instead driving deeper into the Atlantic? A voice whispered in his mind, "Turn back, take them home." Another snarled, "Lost is lost." Fex. A chilling thought whispered, "Perhaps some power beyond man holds us here." Above the Atlantic night, 5 TBM Avengers pressed on, 5 steel phantoms drifting through nothingness. And at that moment, history etched one of aviation's greatest mysteries, the enigma named Flight 19. The moment the compass needles began to spin wildly, refusing to hold to any direction, Flight 19 instantly fell into a state of silent chaos. For pilots trained to rely on instruments for orientation, losing the compass was no different from being blindfolded in the middle of a desert. But if in the desert, there were still the sun or mountain shadows to serve as markers, over the ocean there was only endless blue. No boundaries, no signs to cling to. Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor knew better than anyone. All standardized triangular drills had become impossible. The carefully designed route was meant to train cadets in long-range flight and course changes by command. Yet all of it relied on the assumption that instruments worked normally. Now, that assumption had collapsed completely. Taylor stared at the instrument panel, watching the needle spin madly. He tried comparing time with wind direction, but nothing was certain. Any decision now could turn the squadron into prey for the sea. Just a few dozen minutes of error would be enough to drain their fuel. In Plane 2, Cadet Raines muttered over the radio, "Leader, I can't tell east anymore. Are we flying in circles?" Taylor paused for a second, then answered firmly, "Hold formation. Don't guess. Just stay on me." But inside each cockpit, the same question repeated. Where are we flying? Could we already be so far from Florida that there's no way back? In the minutes that followed, the squadron began to feel the immediate consequences. Every concept of direction was meaningless. East might mean deeper sea. West might lead further from land. North or south no longer mattered because they were drifting in a void. No map could save them. Maps required coordinates, and coordinates depended on the compass. To maintain order, Taylor ordered them to keep the V formation. But even that became difficult. Without a shared reference, each plane relied only on eyesight to maintain distance from its neighbor. Every bump of wind, every shadow of cloud threatened to unravel the formation. Voice hard, listen closely. Forget the compass, trust me, we'll find our way. But deep down he knew, the endpoint of every triangular drill was always Florida. Now, that destination had become a fading mirage, slipping beyond reach. Minute by minute, the fuel ticked lower. On the gauges, the fuel needles dropped slowly but relentlessly. The pilots all saw it, but none dared speak, for they knew their time was being devoured drop by drop. Outside, the night sea stretched wider, with no borders, no escape. In that sky, the 5 TBM Avengers were nothing more than steel birds, lost in an invisible labyrinth no map could chart. The steady drone of engines filled the black sky, but inside the cockpits, turmoil grew louder. When direction vanished, fear no longer came from outside. It came from within. The young airmen, trained to obey and follow orders, now began to wonder, is the commander leading us astray? In Plane 4, an argument broke out. The gunner shouted into the mic, "We can't keep flying like this! The fuel will run out!" The pilot snapped back, "Shut up! Leader said hold formation, so hold formation!" But then another voice broke in, shaky yet resolute. "Leader, this is 5. If we turn west, we'll hit land for sure. We can't keep flying into the dark." The radio net seemed to fracture. All the squadron heard it, and hesitation spread. Taylor was silent for a few seconds, a heavy pause, as if he too felt the pull of the suggestion. Turning west, toward Florida, sounded logical, but with no compass, west was just an empty word. If they had already drifted south of Cuba or deeper into the Atlantic, west might only lead them farther into the abyss. Taylor drew a long breath, then barked, "-5. We don't know our position. Break formation, and we're lost." A chorus of sighs came through the headsets. The cadets knew he was right, but the bitter truth was, none of them could say what was right or wrong. But doubt seeped into every cockpit, smoldering like a fire that could flare at any moment. In Plane 2, Raines whispered to his crewmate over the intercom, voice trembling, "If the compass doesn't work, if the radio fails, could it be we've flown into what they call the Bermuda Triangle?" The words struck like a curse. His partner shuddered. The legend of a sea that swallowed ships and planes was no longer a joke when they were living it. In an instant, every eye turned to the lead plane. Taylor was no longer just a commander. He was their last thread of faith, the fragile rope keeping them from the abyss of the supernatural. The squadron flew on, engines still roaring, but the minds within were fractured. In the night, orders and doubt collided, leaving cracks in the unity that had been their strength. The needles on the gauges ticked on, each minute no longer just time, but life being consumed. Fuel dropped steadily, and they all knew, when the needle reached red, the sea would be their only fate. In Plane 2, Raines stared at the fuel gauge, his hand trembling on the stick. His crewmate whispered, "How much longer do we have?" Raines choked out, "At this rate, maybe just over 2 hours." Up front, Taylor saw the harsh truth as well. He tried to sound calm on the radio. "Attention all, fuel is enough, but not plenty. Hold formation, conserve every drop." But every man knew the real meaning. It was a warning. They had flown more than 2.5 hours, longer than the entire planned exercise. Without a course, the limit loomed closer with every breath. In Plane 5, Matthews, the veteran radioman, did quick math. At their present speed, their remaining range was a few hundred kilometers at most, but their location within that radius was unknown. Bahamas, Atlantic, or Cuba. He closed his notebook silently, for the numbers offered no comfort. Tension bled into the radio. A pilot pleaded, "Leader, please, let us turn west. But ditching at night was no rescue. It was death. The heavy planes would shatter, the icy waters would consume them before help could come. In their minds, the ocean had become an enemy, waiting to devour. Taylor knew he had to keep them flying as long as possible. Every minute was a chance for a signal from land or a passing patrol. He buried his own despair, forcing his voice to remain steady, the only thread binding their hope. But truth was merciless. Their time was nearly gone. And when the fuel bled dry, only 2 choices would remain: crash into the sea or vanish into the night. The 5 TBM Avengers, like 5 steel arrows, still shot through the dark. But no arrow aimed at a target anymore. They were racing only against the fuel needles, in a contest that all knew would end with no victor. At first, in the initial minutes after discovering the compass needles spinning erratically, many of the cadets thought it was just a minor technical glitch. During training, they had heard instructors mention brief magnetic interference, or that a compass could shift slightly if the plane banked for too long. So, the first whispers in the cockpits circled around one hopeful idea. It'll settle down in a few minutes. But those few minutes stretched into half an hour, then nearly an hour, and still the compasses spun like cursed tops. That was when the nervous smiles vanished from the cadets' faces. A quiet unease began to take root, and the most terrifying realization: no one in the squadron could say for certain which way was truly home. In Plane 3, Lewis tapped the compass glass, hoping the needle would freeze. Instead, it quivered mockingly, trembling with every heartbeat. He looked at his crewmate. Both their eyes mirrored the same confusion. If this doesn't work, Lewis thought, what else do we have to depend on? Meanwhile, in Plane 5, Matthews, a confident cadet, tried to reassure his crew. Don't worry, we've still got Taylor. He's flown the Pacific. He'll know what to do. For a moment, silence filled the cockpit, but then a colder thought crept in. And if even Taylor isn't sure? Lieutenant Charles Taylor was indeed experienced. He had flown through savage battles, escaped worse odds than this, but now he was trapped in a cruel dilemma. Each glance at the meaningless compass needle tightened his chest. He knew that any decision made now was nothing less than gambling with the fate of 14 lives. Through the radio, Taylor's voice came calm and steady. Listen up. The compasses are acting up, but it's all right. Keep formation. Don't lose your heads. His words, strong and unwavering, acted like a tether, keeping the squadron's spirit intact. But inside, Taylor fought his own fear. He knew that one wrong move meant not just failure in an exercise, but the death of an entire squadron. They had been raised to trust instruments, to believe in technology. Now, with all tools betraying them, only instinct remained. And instinct, unchecked, could just as easily sow chaos as it could save. On that dark sky, fear no longer came from the roar of engines or the restless sea, but from the hollow space within each pilot, the suffocating sense of being trapped in an invisible maze with no exit, and no one who truly knew the way out. No one voiced it aloud, but fear spread faster than radio waves, first in restless glances, then in sighs, then in whispered doubts. And when doubt reached its breaking point, it threatened the only thing holding them together: faith in their commander. In Plane 2, Rains kept scanning the endless black ocean outside until at last he muttered, "We've been flying forever. What if Taylor never finds the way back?" His crewmate, quiet for a long time, finally answered in a near whisper, as though afraid the words themselves carried doom. "Then we'll drown out here." The silence that followed weighed heavier than steel. Somewhere in both their minds, a fracture widened. In Plane 4, the tension boiled over. The gunner slammed his fist on the seat. "I don't care anymore! We should turn west. At least there's a chance of land." The pilot spun around, eyes blazing. "Shut your mouth! Orders are to hold formation. You want to get us all killed?" The argument bled into the radio net. For a few seconds, the squadron was deathly silent, engines droning in the void. Everyone heard it. Everyone knew. The bond between them was fraying. Taylor's voice cut through like thunder. "Enough! That's an order! No one breaks formation. Anyone who turns is committing suicide." His roar silenced the mutiny, but Taylor himself felt the truth. His authority was being tested. With compasses useless and radios faltering, he was the last instrument they had left. And if that instrument failed, the squadron would dissolve instantly. In Plane 3, Lewis shut his eyes. #meta, pause. 0.05. He fought to hide it every second because he knew, if they saw his doubt, the squadron would shatter. Outside, the winds strengthened, rattling the planes. Clouds smothered what little light remained. Taylor felt like he was leading a blind march into a labyrinth with no exit. For a fleeting moment, he remembered his early training. An old instructor's words echoed. "A pilot survives by skill, but a leader survives by trust. Lose your men's trust, and you lose their lives." Now, those words returned as a curse. Taylor understood. His real mission wasn't to find the right heading anymore. It was to keep the squadron believing, to keep them together, even to the last drop of fuel. And so, in the endless black sky, the 5 TBM Avengers still flew like arrows with no target. At the tip, Taylor, full of doubt himself, was forced to become their lighthouse. A lighthouse that might not last, but still had to shine, if only to keep hope alive a little longer. From above, the ocean between Florida, the Bahamas, and Puerto Rico does not sketch out any triangle. There is only a vast expanse of deep blue, sometimes streaked silver by sun and wind, sometimes dulled gray by passing clouds. Yet to old sailors and naval aviators, that place carried an invisible chart, a chart of whispered tales, of compass needles suddenly betraying, of radios fading as though someone had turned the volume down. They called it by the name that would enter legend, the Bermuda Triangle. When Flight 19 slipped into the velvet air of the Atlantic on December 5, 1945, no one spoke of any triangle. They were soldiers, trusting in paper charts, in chrome-plated compasses, in orders and discipline. But when every needle trembled at once, when bearings slipped through their grasp like sand, that invisible chart seemed to be drawn bold before their eyes. Taylor did not name it. He simply read in his cadets' faces the ancient seafarer's fear. Some waters do not obey rules. In the radio bay of Plane 4, Matthews scribbled, "Compasses drifting simultaneously, possible magnetic interference." The phrase, magnetic interference, unlocked an old maritime memory. Wooden ships losing course in the warm waters of the Sargasso Sea, scattered logs of bent isogonic lines, nights when the stars vanished and sailors had only creaking timbers and hissing waves to guide them. He was no mystic, but he understood that today's anomaly connected straight into a long corridor of lore. Beneath their wings, the sea was uncannily still. Vast mats of golden-brown sargassum floated like drifting islands, glinting in the dimming light. From a distance, they resembled low shores, illusions cruel to eyes desperate for land. "An island?" someone said over the radio. Taylor had to deny it sharply, for he knew mirages were traps in these waters. In the Bermuda Triangle, it was not just the compass that misled, but the longing to believe in a shoreline that did not exist. Then, the radios frayed, as though veiled in gauze. No one in Flight 19 spoke the words Bermuda Triangle aloud. It lingered only at the edges of thought. Yet each time a needle shivered, each time a radio clipped into silence, the name grew louder inside their heads. The young could mock legend, until legend wore the mask of truth. And that night, truth bore the face of the invisible triangle. Compasses betraying, radios fragmenting, seas flat as a blade, land forever absent. When the PBM Mariner rescue plane vanished too, the triangle's lines were inked darker. The Bermuda Triangle did not need storms to prove itself. It required only silence. Silence of the compass. Silence of the radio. Silence of the sea. Within those silences, Flight 19 became a scarlet seal pressed upon the myth. By the next morning, the press erupted. "Squadron lost in fair weather. Compasses spin wildly. Rescue plane also missing." In an America newly returned from war, where the people had grown used to grim dispatches, this story still pierced them. Not because of the dead, but because of the void. No bodies, no wreckage, no coordinates. A void perfect for myth-making. Reporters dug through archives, unearthing clippings of freighters swallowed near the Bahamas, of civilian aircraft vanishing into clear skies. They connected dots. They drew a triangle. Miami, San Juan, Bermuda. Easy to remember, easy to print. And once those lines appeared in ink, all the scattered tales clicked into place, like stars suddenly woven into a constellation. Flight 19 sat at the center of that constellation. Earlier stories were singular fears: a ship, a plane, a night gone wrong. Flight 19 was different. 5 planes at once, then a rescue plane too. Numbers created scale. Scale created gravity. Gravity pulled every mystery into orbit. From then on, any wavering compass or crackling radio in those waters could be ascribed to the triangle. In veterans clubs, Taylor's name was spoken with the more the triangle seemed to exist. That is how legends work. Repetition itself becomes proof. Flight 19 provided the perfect seed. Fair weather, thorough checks, fuel in plenty. Then, silence. It denied all easy explanations, and when easy explanations die, specters find ground. Some wrote, "Perhaps nature here follows laws not yet named." A wise line, because it left room for both science and legend. Science would strive to name. Legend would thrive in the gap before naming. In that interlude, newspapers, radio, and later television transformed the triangle from a set of coordinates into a psychological space, a place one entered with full trust and compass, and left, if at all, with more questions than answers. Flight 19 did not invent the Bermuda Triangle. It stamped the plate. From then on, every disappearance in those waters could be printed again, sharp and marketable. Years later, investigators returned with magnetometers, satellites, wind and current models. Reports showed higher than average magnetic variation, complex currents, humid air columns disrupting radio, thunderstorms blooming swiftly and unannounced. Science filed many mysteries into drawers of small causes, compounded into major incidents. But one thing science never erased: the chill in the spine when listening to the broken transmissions of December 5, 1945. "My compass is spinning!" Then silence. That chill came from somewhere else, from the human realization that when every trusted tool betrays at once, faith itself is fragile as a sail in salt wind. And perhaps that is the Bermuda Triangle's true force. Not ghosts, not wormholes, but the bending of belief. Sailors trust stars. A single cloud can blot them out. Pilots trust compasses. A few degrees of drift can erase their meaning. Operators trust radios. A humid band of static can make them stutter. When all three pillars splinter together, mystery needs no help. We finish the story ourselves. That night, Taylor fought one setback's 0.05. The invisible chart lives on, fueled by collective memory. There, Flight 19 is not just a Navy log entry, but the protagonist of a modern epic, a saga of orientation lost in a world that thought it was already mapped. Someday, with enough sensors, satellites, and models, science may trace every magnetic quiver, every static burst, until the Bermuda Triangle looks ordinary. But even then, Flight 19 will keep one unmeasurable truth. The moment a young cadet watched his compass needle shiver and knew the map had slipped from his hands. The moment Taylor became a lighthouse without knowing how long he could still shine. The moment the PBM mariner also fell silent, like an exclamation point at the end of a sentence. If an invisible power exists, it may simply be the power of emptiness, the place where radio waves fail, stars vanish, compasses stutter, and fear fills the gap better than any explanation. In that void, legend grows, and at its heart, Flight 19, launched in perfection, became a question forever suspended above the sea. When direction disappears, what do we have left to believe in? On that day, December 5, 1945, everything began like a flawless training exercise. The weather was clear, the wind light, the fuel sufficient for 5 hours of flight, and every system had been carefully inspected. There was not a single signal of impending disaster. For the young cadet pilots, it was just another routine drill. Fly a triangular course over the sea and return to Fort Lauderdale. For Lieutenant Charles C. Taylor, the seasoned commander, it was a familiar assignment. But then, the compasses began to spin erratically. Not one, but all of them. Not in one aircraft, but in all 5 at once. The phenomenon was like an invisible blow striking the very order built on iron discipline and absolute trust in technology. At that moment, no one in the squadron knew they had just crossed the first threshold of a chain of tragedy. A chain that began with a small mishap, seemingly ignorable, but which grew and eventually pulled the entire squadron into a vortex of fate. Taylor tried to reassure his trainees. "Don't look at the compass. Keep formation. Just follow me." Yet, deep inside, he knew the most vital anchor for a pilot over the sea had collapsed. On land, they could still rely on mountains, rivers, or cities as landmarks. Over the boundless ocean, the compass was their eyes, the only bridge between man and direction. When it betrayed them, it was as though they were walking blind in the dark. The failure was not just a technical malfunction. It was a hinge moment when an ordinary flight turned its face into tragedy. From that instant, everything slid downhill. Disputes, confusion, broken communication, disorientation, and finally, disappearance without a trace. In the journal one cadet had left behind before takeoff, there was a line. "Today's flight will probably be like all the others." No one imagined that only hours later, those words would become a cruel prophecy. A flight like all the others would become a flight like no other. That compass failure did more than expel sex, 0.05, but a single wayward needle could shatter all confidence. They realized all the glory of war, all the legends of naval aviators, were suspended by a fragile thread, the thread called navigation instruments. Taylor knew it well. He had fought, shot down enemies, faced barrages of anti-aircraft fire. But here, over the night sea, his enemy had no shape. It hid in the spinning compass, in the stuttering radio, in the tremor of his cadet's eyes. And what terrified him most, he had no weapon against it. If that day the compass needle had simply held steady, Flight 19 would likely have returned safely, leaving behind just another training day. But it did not. And in that betrayal, humanity's smallness before the ocean was laid bare. As the failure dragged on, the squadron fell into a state of unraveling. Arguments broke out. Some wanted to turn west. Some believed they were flying in circles. Some thought they saw islands shimmering on the surface. All of it traced back to the same root cause. The compass no longer pointed the way. Taylor, caught in a cruel dilemma, ordered them to hold formation. He knew that if even one broke off, the squadron would disintegrate. Yet the truth was, they had lost their common reference. The formation could hold, but no one knew where it was heading. From then, events became a domino of tragedy. Disorientation led to wasted time. Wasted time meant dwindling fuel. Dwindling fuel meant the decision to ditch at sea, and ditching at night almost certainly meant vanishing forever. Flight 19 thus became living proof of a rule. Catastrophe does not need to begin with an explosion or a storm. It can begin with the smallest detail, a tiny metal needle in a glass case. But when that detail fails, everything else falls with it. The compass failure opened the door that led the squadron into darkness. It was not just a technical glitch, it was a historic turning point, transforming a safe training mission into the tragedy called Flight